He asked me to pretend to be his fiancée to meet his parents. I walked in, bracing for judgment, but his mother's reaction left me speechless and fighting back tears. Emma Collins had always lived a quiet, predictable life. At 29, she was a third-grade teacher at Willow Creek Elementary in Denver, loved by her students for her warmth and patience, and known among her coworkers for her ability to remain calm even when chaos erupted in the classroom. Her days were filled with lesson plans, parent-teacher conferences, and the occasional Friday happy hour with fellow teachers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and that was exactly how she liked it. That's why when Daniel Parker, the usually composed and somewhat reserved science teacher from the classroom down the hall, asked if he could talk to her after school, she hadn't expected anything out of the ordinary. Maybe he needed help planning a cross-disciplinary project or wanted her opinion on a student. But as she sat across from him in the empty staff lounge, sipping lukewarm coffee, his words caught her completely off guard. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancé." Emma blinked, thinking she'd misheard. "Come again?" Daniel leaned forward, clasping his hands together like he was about to present a case in court. "It's just for a weekend. This weekend. My parents are hosting a dinner in Asheville, North Carolina. The whole family's going to be there. And, well, they think I'm engaged." There was a moment of silence as Emma stared at him, waiting for a punchline that never came. "You told your family you're engaged?" He nodded, clearly embarrassed. "It wasn't supposed to get this far. It started with my mom asking if I was seeing anyone, and he sighed, rubbing his face, I said yes. Then she got excited. Started asking questions. I panicked. Said we were engaged. That was 6 months ago." Emma leaned back slowly. "And now you need someone to play the part?" "I know it's a lot to ask," Daniel said quickly, sensing her hesitation. "But I trust you. And you're the only one who knows me well enough to pull it off. We've worked together for 3 years? You know how I think, how I talk. I wouldn't ask if it weren't important." "Why not just tell them the truth?" she asked, crossing her arms. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because it's not just about disappointing them. It's complicated. There's a lot going on, and this dinner, it's more than just a meal. I promise I'll explain everything on the way. Just, please, Emma. I wouldn't ask if I had another option." His voice cracked slightly at the end, and for the first time since he sat down, Emma saw something beneath his composed exterior, something vulnerable. She didn't know much about Daniel's family or personal life, he kept those things close to the chest. But in that moment, she sensed this wasn't about saving face, it was about something deeper. Still, pretending to be someone's fiancé? That wasn't exactly something she could take lightly. "I'm not an actress," she said carefully. "I'm not expecting a performance. Just you, being, you. But with a ring on your finger and a slightly altered backstory." Emma let out a long breath, her mind racing. She thought about her quiet weekend plans, laundry, maybe some grading, a new novel she'd been meaning to start. None of it involved flying across the country and deceiving an entire family. But then again, Daniel looked genuinely desperate. And if what he said was true, if she was the only one he could ask, then maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Just for the weekend. "What do I have to wear?" she asked finally, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Daniel's face broke into the first real smile she'd seen all week. "Something that says, I might have tamed your son." Emma laughed despite herself. "Fine. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for the story I'll get to tell my students one day." He stood and offered his hand like they were sealing a business deal. "Deal." She shook it, half expecting her palm to start sweating. "And one more thing," she said, grabbing her bag and slinging it over her shoulder. "You owe me coffee. Every Monday. For a year. Done." As she walked out of the lounge and toward her car, Emma felt a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration. She had no idea what she'd just signed up for, but something told her this weekend would change everything. And she had 72 hours to learn how to be someone else's fiancée. The flight to Asheville had been uneventful, save for the awkward silences and occasional glances exchanged between Emma and Daniel. Neither of them seemed entirely sure how to behave. They weren't a real couple, but pretending to be one, especially in close quarters, required a strange, unspoken coordination. By the time they landed, night had already blanketed the small North Carolina town, and the airport was quiet. Daniel had rented a car, and the drive to his parents' house was a winding 30-minute trip through tree-lined roads, the streetlights casting long, flickering shadows. Emma stared out the window, her fingers nervously twisting the fake engagement ring Daniel had given her earlier that morning. It was a modest piece, a delicate silver band with a single small stone, just believable enough to pass for real, but clearly chosen in haste. She wondered how many lies would hinge on that little ring over the next 48 hours. "You okay?" Daniel asked without taking his eyes off the road. Emma nodded, though her stomach was tight. "I just don't want to mess this up." "You won't," he said quietly. "Just be yourself. My mom's going to love you." That wasn't comforting. It was pressure. A mother's love wasn't something you earned easily, not in a single weekend, and especially not under false pretenses. When they finally turned onto a long, gravel driveway flanked by tall oaks, Emma sat up straighter. The house at the end of the path came into view, a wide, colonial-style home with a wraparound porch and large windows glowing warmly against the night. It was beautiful, in that old-money, generational home sort of way. Emma felt her breath catch. This wasn't just a family visit. This was stepping into someone else's world. As they parked, the front door opened, and a woman stepped onto the porch, waving. Daniel let out a slow breath. "That's my mom." Emma followed him up the steps, her pulse pounding. The woman who greeted them was elegant and composed, her silver hair pulled into a low chignon, wearing a soft blue cardigan that somehow made her seem both refined and maternal. "Daniel," she said, pulling him into a firm hug. "You didn't tell me you'd be arriving so late, I would have had the coffee ready." "Sorry, Mom," he said, hugging her back. "We had a small delay. But I want you to meet someone." Margaret Parker turned to Emma with bright, curious eyes. "So you're Emma. Finally. We've heard so much about you." Emma offered her most polite smile, reaching out her hand. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Parker." Margaret ignored the handshake and pulled Emma into a hug instead. "Call me Margaret. And welcome to our home. Come in, come in. Everyone's waiting." "Everyone?" Emma barely had time to process that before she was ushered inside. The interior of the house was just as grand as the outside, high ceilings, crown molding, polished wood floors that creaked with history. Family photos lined the walls, and the scent of cinnamon and something savory lingered in the air. In the living room, 3 people stood as they entered, a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression, clearly Daniel's father, a younger man with the same sharp jawline, his brother, probably, and a woman with a baby balanced on her hip, smiling warmly. Introductions were a blur. Walter Parker, the patriarch, offered Emma a measured handshake and a nod that felt more like a silent assessment. Alex, Daniel's brother, was friendlier, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He studied Emma a beat too long, like he was already trying to figure out where the cracks in the story were. The woman with the baby turned out to be Alex's wife, Sarah, and she seemed genuinely kind, chatting about how long the flight must have been and how excited everyone was to finally meet the fiancé. Dinner was already on the table. A roast, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and freshly baked bread. Clearly, this was a special occasion. Emma found herself seated beside Daniel, across from Margaret, with Walter at the head of the table and Alex to his right. The conversation began light, filled with the usual pleasantries, work, travel, weather, but beneath it all, Emma could sense the undercurrents. "So," Walter said after a sip of wine, setting his glass down with deliberation. "How did the two of you meet?" Emma felt Daniel's hand graze hers under the table, a silent cue. "At work," he said smoothly. "She was grading papers in the lounge, and I stole her stapler." The table chuckled, and Emma smiled, playing along. And he didn't even apologize, she added. He just walked off with it like it was his. I had to chase him down. Margaret beamed. Well, sometimes love starts with theft. But a stapler? Sarah teased. A very good stapler, Daniel said with mock seriousness, earning another round of laughter. Emma felt herself relax, slightly. The story had clearly been prepared in advance, and they were sticking to the script well. But as the conversation continued, it became increasingly clear that Daniel's family dynamics were far more complex than he'd let on. Every time Walter addressed Daniel, there was a faint edge in his tone, a formality that suggested unresolved tension. Alex, too, seemed caught between playing the good son and challenging his brother. He asked questions that seemed innocent on the surface, where they were planning to live after the wedding, how long they'd been engaged, but there was an undercurrent to them. Emma felt like she was walking a tightrope, her smile never faltering, even as her heart raced with every new inquiry. And when's the big day? Margaret asked, her eyes gleaming. Daniel hesitated just a second too long. We're still deciding. Probably early spring. Small ceremony. Margaret nodded, satisfied. But Alex raised an eyebrow. Spring's not far off. That doesn't leave much time. Emma jumped in. We're keeping it simple. Neither of us wants a huge production. And the dress? Sarah asked kindly. Any idea what you're looking for? Oh, I haven't even started looking yet, Emma replied truthfully. The conversation veered toward wedding planning, and Emma was relieved when dessert was finally served, a spiced apple pie that tasted like autumn. Margaret insisted on piling Emma's plate high, and Emma accepted graciously, though she wasn't sure her stomach could handle another bite. After dinner, while the others moved to the living room with drinks and laughter, Margaret took Emma's arm gently and led her toward the hallway. I hope you don't mind, she said, but I've put you two in the guest suite upstairs. It's the most private. I figured you'd want some space. Emma smiled tightly. That's very kind, thank you. As they climbed the stairs, Margaret paused on the landing and turned to Emma with a look that was almost searching. He's never brought anyone home before, she said softly. Not in years. Emma didn't know how to respond. She offered a nod, unsure whether that was a compliment or a warning. Inside the room, Daniel was already taking off his jacket, loosening the collar of his shirt. Emma closed the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling hard. That was intense. Daniel nodded. You did great. Your brother's onto us. I know. He always has been the skeptical one. Emma looked around the room, plush bedding, antique furniture, and a window that overlooked the dark silhouette of trees outside. It was beautiful, yes. But it wasn't hers. None of this was. How many more questions are they going to ask? All of them, Daniel said. But if we make it through tomorrow's brunch, we're in the clear. Emma nodded, pulling her hair back into a loose ponytail. Then we better get our story straight. Every detail. They spent the next hour quietly sitting on the bed, reviewing the fictional timeline of their relationship, first date, first fight, proposal, favorite meals, annoying habits. It felt strange, rehearsing intimacy like lines in a play, but necessary. By the time they finished, Emma's eyes were heavy. Daniel stood, gesturing toward the couch in the corner. I'll take that. You don't have to. I do, he interrupted. It's fine. Get some rest. As Emma crawled into bed and pulled the blanket over her, she glanced toward him. He sat silently on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. There was a sadness to him then, something hollow that made her chest tighten. She turned off the bedside lamp. In the dark, the room fell into silence, save for the hum of cicadas outside the window. And for the first time, Emma wondered what, exactly, she had gotten herself into. The next morning greeted Emma with a cold, gray sky and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the hallway. She sat up slowly, momentarily disoriented until the unfamiliar ceiling and the distant clatter of dishes reminded her exactly where she was. She heard movement in the guest suite's bathroom, Daniel, probably getting ready. Emma dragged herself out of bed and moved to the window. Outside, the Parker estate was quiet, the trees swaying lazily in the morning wind, their branches casting shadows that danced across the lawn. Downstairs, the house had already come alive. The scent of breakfast had been replaced by the aroma of herbs and roasted meat, suggesting that Margaret was already preparing for the evening's dinner. Emma dressed quickly and headed down to find the kitchen humming with activity. Margaret, in a crisp apron, moved between the stove and the counter with effortless grace, humming softly as she chopped vegetables. Emma offered to help, and to her surprise, Margaret accepted without hesitation. The two worked side by side in a companionable rhythm, peeling, stirring, arranging. Every now and then, Margaret would ask questions: where Emma grew up, what her parents did, what drew her to teaching. Emma kept her answers honest but vague, careful not to stray too far from the carefully curated backstory she and Daniel had rehearsed. Later in the afternoon, as the final preparations for dinner were being made, more family arrived. Cousins, an uncle, a couple of aunts. The house became louder, fuller, the energy shifting from warm hospitality to something more formal and anticipatory. Emma found herself introduced again and again, every new handshake reminding her of the lie she was standing inside. Daniel stayed close, always within arm's reach, offering subtle reassurances, a light touch on her back, a shared glance, a well-timed anecdote. But even he seemed on edge. He laughed a little too hard, smiled a little too wide. Emma noticed how he seemed to avoid long interactions with his father, and how his posture stiffened any time Alex entered the room. By 6 o'clock, everyone had gathered in the formal dining room. The table was set immaculately with porcelain plates, polished silver, and neatly folded linen napkins. Crystal glasses sparkled under the soft glow of the chandelier. Emma had been seated beside Daniel again, across from Margaret, with Walter at the head of the table as before. Alex sat 2 seats down, his sharp eyes sweeping the table like a silent observer. Dinner began with polite conversation and small talk. Sarah commented on a new book club she had joined, an aunt reminisced about a vacation to Vermont, and someone shared a story about a neighbor's misbehaving dog. Emma participated when prompted, smiled when expected, but her mind remained alert. Every word she spoke, every gesture, felt like a performance under scrutiny. And then, without warning, the tone shifted. Walter set down his fork and cleared his throat, drawing the table's attention. His voice was calm, but commanding. "Daniel," he said, "Margaret tells me you've been considering a move back east." Daniel straightened slightly, his expression guarded. "It's something we've talked about." Emma blinked. That hadn't been part of the plan. Walter's gaze turned to her. "And how do you feel about that, Emma? About leaving Denver?" Emma hesitated just long enough for it to be noticed. "I love my job," she said carefully. "But I'm open to wherever life takes us. I think any decision like that should be made together." Walter hummed thoughtfully and took a sip of wine. "Interesting," Alex said, his tone casual but loaded. "Because last time we spoke, you said you weren't sure about settling down at all." Emma felt Daniel shift beside her. She placed a steadying hand on his knee under the table. "That was months ago," Daniel said evenly. "Things change." "They sure do," Alex replied, his eyes now on Emma. "Especially when you meet the right person." There was a beat of silence, long enough for Margaret to speak up, her voice light, trying to dispel the tension. "Well, I think wherever they decide to live, they'll make a lovely home. They seem very in sync." Emma gave a tight smile and took a sip of water, trying to will her pulse to slow. The conversation moved on, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every interaction now carried a subtle edge, every question tinged with suspicion or expectation. The food, which was undoubtedly delicious, tasted like cardboard in her mouth. Dessert came, and with it, the inevitable question. "So," one of the aunts asked, "who proposed?" Daniel smiled. "I did." All eyes turned to Emma. And how did he do it? Sarah asked with genuine curiosity. Emma drew in a breath, remembering the version they had rehearsed. He organized a picnic, she began. In a little park near school. It was just the two of us. I thought it was a normal lunch, and then he pulled out the ring, hidden in a book, of all things. What book? Alex interjected. Emma blinked, caught off guard. To Kill a Mockingbird. Daniel chuckled. She always talks about how it's her favorite. I figured it was fitting. Clever, Walter said, though his tone was unreadable. Margaret, however, seemed genuinely moved. That's so sweet, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze Emma's hand. Emma managed a grateful smile, but inside, a new kind of unease settled in. The story was holding, but just barely. And Alex was circling like a hawk. After dinner, as the guests dispersed into smaller conversations around the living room, Emma excused herself and slipped out to the porch. The cool evening air was a relief, cutting through the layers of anxiety that had built up over the evening. She stood by the railing, staring out into the darkness, trying to remember how to breathe normally again. A few minutes later, Daniel joined her, handing her a glass of wine. You were incredible in there, he said softly. She didn't answer right away. You didn't tell me about the job thing, she finally said. Daniel exhaled. I didn't think it would come up. My dad keeps trying to find ways to bring me back here. It's a thing. Emma looked at him. You should have told me. If I hadn't improvised, we could have blown the whole story. I'm sorry, he said. I wasn't thinking straight. She sipped the wine, her gaze fixed on the tree-line. They're suspicious. Especially your brother. I know. And your dad. He doesn't like me. Daniel glanced toward the house. He doesn't like anyone. He's always been impossible. Emma turned to him. Then why are we here? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He set his glass down on the railing and ran a hand through his hair. Because this weekend was supposed to be about showing them I've moved on, he said. That I'm okay. That I've found something real. Even if it's not actually real. Emma studied his face, the way the porch light cast shadows across his features. There was something deeper in his voice now, something that hinted at wounds he hadn't named yet. Are you okay? She asked. He didn't meet her eyes. I will be. I just didn't want to come back alone. Emma didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. They stood in silence for a few minutes, the night stretching out before them, heavy with everything unspoken. Inside, the sound of laughter and piano music drifted through the open door. A family gathering, joyful on the surface, cracking quietly underneath. Emma wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain, this story was far more fragile than she'd thought. And the truth, whatever it was starting to seep through the seams. The morning after the tense dinner passed in a subdued haze. Emma awoke to a cloud-covered sky and the muffled voices of the Parker family moving about downstairs. She stayed in bed longer than usual, her thoughts tangled with everything from the night before, Walter's probing questions, Alex's barely concealed suspicion, Margaret's unexpected warmth. It was beginning to feel less like a weekend of pretending and more like walking a wire, high above a room full of people watching for a misstep. She eventually dressed and found her way to the kitchen, where Sarah was feeding her baby in a high chair while Margaret folded a linen napkin on the counter. Good morning, dear, Margaret said with her usual gentleness. I hope you slept well. Emma offered a polite smile. I did. Thank you. There's coffee in the press. Help yourself, Sarah added with a friendly nod. Her tone was casual, but Emma still sensed the slightest shift, a pause between her words, a curious flick of her eyes. Everyone was watching her, even in the smallest gestures. Daniel joined them soon after, and the four made light conversation while sipping coffee and nibbling on leftover biscuits. But the atmosphere lacked the ease of the previous day. Alex and Walter were notably absent, and their absence was somehow louder than their presence. After an hour, the group dispersed. Margaret began setting up for lunch, Sarah took the baby upstairs, and Daniel nudged Emma toward the backyard. "We need some air," he muttered. Outside, the garden stretched out behind the house with orderly flower beds and trimmed hedges leading to a quiet stone path. They followed it in silence until they reached a small gazebo framed by climbing ivy. It was far enough from the house that their voices wouldn't carry. "I think we're doing okay," Daniel said, sitting on the wooden bench. "Nobody's called us out yet." Emma sat beside him, pulling her cardigan tighter. "Alex came close last night. You saw that? He's bluffing. He always bluffs." Emma didn't answer right away. The truth was she didn't know how much longer they could keep bluffing too. "What exactly did you tell them before all this?" she asked. "Not just about me, but everything. Your plans, your life." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I painted a picture. Successful job, happy relationship, plans to settle down. The version of me they always wanted. The version I couldn't be." Emma let that settle between them. She had known from the beginning this wasn't just about a lie, it was about something Daniel hadn't fully faced. Before she could press further, footsteps approached along the path. They both looked up to see Alex walking toward them, hands in his jacket pockets, face unreadable. "Mind if I borrow Emma for a minute?" he asked, eyes on Daniel. Daniel hesitated. "About what?" Alex ignored the question. "Just a quick walk." Daniel glanced at Emma, and she gave a small nod. "It's fine," she said. Alex waited until Daniel had walked back toward the house before he spoke. "You've got a good memory," he said as they strolled slowly down the path, "but you're a terrible liar." Emma bristled. "Excuse me? You faked your way through the dinner pretty well. The proposal story was decent. But you hesitated on the move, and your reaction to the wedding date was off. My brother may be blind to it, but I'm not." Emma folded her arms. "So what's this, an interrogation?" Alex didn't smile. "No. Just a warning. If you're doing this to hurt him, don't." "I'm not." "Then what are you doing?" Emma stopped walking. "I didn't come here to lie to anyone. He asked me for a favor. I agreed because I care about him. That's it." Alex narrowed his eyes. "Do you care about him, or do you pity him?" Emma's breath caught. He stepped a little closer. "Because pity wears off fast. And when it does, I don't want to be the one picking up the pieces." She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "Whatever this is, whatever you think it is, I'm not here to cause damage. But maybe if you spent more time talking to Daniel and less time trying to expose me, you'd understand why he felt like he had to lie in the first place." Alex didn't respond. He turned back toward the house without a word, leaving her standing in the middle of the path with her heart pounding in her ears. Later that afternoon, the family gathered again for a more casual lunch in the sunroom. The tone was lighter, with Margaret talking about a fundraiser event and Sarah sharing baby photos. Walter was quieter than usual, occasionally glancing toward Daniel but rarely speaking directly to him. Emma, still shaken from the exchange with Alex, focused on staying composed. At one point, as the table laughed over a story Sarah told about a disastrous birthday cake, Alex leaned back in his chair and, without preamble, said, "Emma, do you love Daniel?" The table fell silent. Emma froze. The question came out so clean, so sudden, that it sliced through the air. Everyone turned toward her. Margaret's fork hovered halfway to her mouth. Sarah's smile disappeared. Even Walter raised his eyes. Daniel started to speak, but Emma placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. She turned to Alex. "Yes," she said. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a single word, spoken evenly. It wasn't a lie. Not in that moment. Not with the way her chest felt like it was caving in under everyone's gaze. Alex stared at her for a second longer, then gave a small nod and looked away, as if satisfied, though by what, Emma wasn't sure. Lunch resumed, slowly, like someone had restarted a clock after it had stopped ticking. But the dynamic had shifted again. There was something softer in Margaret's smile now. Walter even asked Daniel a question about his work in Denver, and Daniel answered without the usual stiffness. It wasn't exactly healing, but it was movement. And it started with that single, unexpected question. That evening, as the house settled and the windows filled with fading amber light, Emma sat alone in the guest room, staring at the ring on her finger. The lie that brought her here had begun to fray at the edges, but strangely, it was no longer the lie that concerned her most. It was the truth that was beginning to take shape beneath it. The evening descended with an almost eerie calm. The house had quieted after the emotionally charged lunch, each family member retreating into their own rhythm. Walter returned to his study, Sarah took the baby upstairs for a nap, and Alex disappeared into the backyard, headphones on, pacing near the tree line. Daniel and Emma spent the late afternoon helping Margaret clean up, a task that didn't require words but seemed to carry unspoken weight in every movement. By 7 o'clock, Margaret announced that dinner would be light, leftovers and salad, and suggested everyone help themselves. Emma felt the pressure release from her shoulders as she took her plate into the den and curled into an armchair, glad for the absence of formal table settings and loaded conversations. She wasn't sure how much more scrutiny she could endure, especially after the question Alex had launched at her hours earlier. Daniel joined her a few minutes later, 2 plates balanced in his hands. He passed one to her and sat across the room, legs stretched out, his head tilted back against the cushion. "She believes you," he said quietly. Emma looked at him. "Who?" "My mom. After what you said at lunch. She looked at you like you were real." "I didn't say it for her," Emma replied, voice low. Daniel's eyes found hers. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just looked. There was something different about him in that moment. A softness, yes, but also a kind of conflict, like he wanted to believe what he saw in her face but wasn't sure he deserved to. After dinner, Margaret appeared in the doorway, her expression thoughtful. "Emma," she said gently, "would you come with me for a moment? There's something I'd like to show you." Emma set her plate down and stood, following Margaret through the house and up the stairs. They didn't speak as they passed the guest suite, moving further down the hall to a door Emma hadn't seen open yet. Margaret paused, then turned the knob and stepped inside. The room was smaller than the others, dimly lit, with a thick rug on the floor and bookshelves lining 2 of the walls. A reading chair sat beneath a window, and against the opposite wall stood a large wooden cabinet, its doors slightly ajar. Margaret moved slowly toward it, her fingers trailing the edge. "This was Rachel's favorite room," she said, her voice soft but steady. "She loved to read, just like you apparently do." Emma stiffened at the mention of the name. "She used to sit right there," Margaret continued, nodding toward the chair. "With a blanket and a cup of tea, even in the summer. She said it was the only place in the house that felt entirely hers." Emma wasn't sure what to say. She hadn't known Rachel's name until that moment, and now it was dropped into her hands with the weight of memory behind it. Margaret turned to her, eyes glassy but focused. "You're the first woman Daniel has brought home since she left." Emma's heart slowed. "He didn't tell me much," she admitted carefully. "Only that it ended. That it was painful." Margaret gave a small nod. "It was. They were engaged. We'd already started planning the wedding. And then one day, she called it off. Said she couldn't go through with it. No explanation. Just gone." Emma remained still, her hands clasped in front of her, her breath caught in her throat. "I don't know if he ever told you," Margaret said, "but Daniel stopped talking to us for nearly a year after that. Barely returned our calls. I used to think he blamed us. That we'd pushed too hard. That we made her feel trapped." Emma couldn't look away from her. Margaret's voice wasn't accusing. If anything, it was layered with regret. "I didn't bring you here to guilt you," she added quickly. "I just thought, maybe you'd want to understand why all this matters so much to him. Why we matter. Why this dinner, this weekend, why it wasn't just some family visit. I'm starting to, Emma said. Margaret nodded slowly, her shoulders sinking under the weight of whatever truth she had just shared. He smiles more with you, she added. Even when he's trying not to. That hasn't happened in years. The word struck deeper than Emma was prepared for. She had expected tension, suspicion, maybe even disapproval. But this quiet affirmation, was harder to process. I didn't come here with answers, Emma said honestly. But I came because he asked me to. And that, Margaret said, might be more important than anything else. They left the room in silence, Margaret closing the door gently behind her. Emma didn't ask why the cabinet inside had been half open, or whether it still held remnants of Rachel's presents, books, photographs, letters. She didn't need to. The room itself had told her everything. Back in the guest suite, she found Daniel pacing, hands in his pockets, brows knit in concentration. She talked to you, didn't she? He asked before she could say anything. Emma nodded, moving to the edge of the bed. She told me about Rachel. Daniel stopped pacing. He stared at the floor for a moment before sinking into the chair across from her. I didn't know she would. She wanted me to understand, Emma said. Not just you, but all of this. What it meant to your family. Why this weekend wasn't just a show. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. I didn't mean to drag you into that part. I really didn't. But it's part of you, Emma said. You don't get to separate yourself from it forever. I tried. For 2 years, I tried. Daniel, she said carefully, why did she leave? He looked up, eyes tired. I don't know. I think, maybe it was the pressure. The wedding, the expectations. Or maybe she just realized she didn't love me the way I thought she did. I never got a clear answer. She left, and that was it. Emma watched him. And you never told your family that? No. Because that would mean admitting I didn't see it coming. That I failed. That I wasn't enough. You weren't the only one who lost something, Emma said quietly. Your parents did too. And maybe they didn't handle it right, but they were hurting too. He didn't answer. But something shifted in his expression, less guarded, more honest. I never wanted to lie, he said finally. But I was scared to come home without someone. I thought if I had you with me, even just pretending, it would make it easier. Emma nodded. You were wrong. Daniel blinked. But not about me, she continued. Just about pretending. He let out a long, unsteady breath. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old shutters against the house. Inside the guest suite, the silence between them was no longer tense, it was necessary. Something had changed. Margaret's words had opened a door Emma hadn't realized she was approaching, and Daniel, for the first time, wasn't standing in front of it. When she finally stood and crossed the room to sit beside him, neither of them spoke. She just took his hand, and for once, it wasn't part of the performance. It was something real, quietly unfolding in the space between grief and healing. The following morning arrived with an unusual stillness. Rain tapped lightly against the guest suite window as Emma stirred awake, the room dim under the heavy clouds. She sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the previous day linger in her limbs. The conversation with Margaret, the quiet moment with Daniel, the shift in emotional gravity, it had changed something in her, though she still couldn't articulate what. Daniel was already up. His side of the bed, though untouched, was now empty. She found him out on the porch, sitting on the same bench where they had talked 2 nights before. His posture was rigid, arms resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the gray sky melted into the trees. She stepped outside without a word and took a seat beside him. He didn't look at her at first. She called this morning, he said after a pause. Emma's stomach twisted. She didn't need to ask who. Rachel? He nodded, jaw tight. My mom told her I was in town. I didn't even know they still talked. Emma sat in silence, waiting for him to continue. She wants to meet. Just for coffee. Says she's only in Asheville for a few days, visiting her aunt. Are you going to? Daniel exhaled slowly. I don't know. She glanced at him. Do you want to? He looked back at her then, his expression unreadable. I don't know that either. They stayed like that for a while, the sound of the rain a soft, steady rhythm around them. Emma didn't press. She knew this moment wasn't about advice or support. It was about a choice that only he could make. And whatever he decided would say more about where he stood now than anything he could explain. By midday, the sky had begun to clear, and the Parker house gradually filled with life again. Laughter from the baby upstairs, the smell of something baking in the oven, the faint buzz of Margaret's voice on the phone. Emma found herself moving through it all in a daze. The intimacy she had started to build with Daniel now felt like a fragile glass wall, one that could shatter with the wrong word. It wasn't until late afternoon that Daniel came to find her. She was in the backyard near the garden, crouched by a row of fading daisies. I'm going, he said, stopping a few feet away. Emma stood slowly, brushing her hands on her jeans. To meet her? He nodded. At the coffee shop in town. She didn't ask if he wanted her to come. She already knew the answer. I'll be back in a couple hours. Emma watched him leave, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes as he disappeared around the side of the house. The sun had started to break through the clouds now, casting dappled light across the lawn. But the chill in her chest didn't lift. The hours passed slowly. She tried reading, but her eyes wouldn't stay on the page. She helped Margaret with dinner prep again, but her thoughts kept drifting. Every time the clock ticked forward, her nerves twisted tighter. She told herself she trusted him, that this wasn't about jealousy. But still, the image of Rachel, the fiancée who left, the ghost still haunting these walls, refused to fade. When Daniel finally returned, the sun had sunk low, casting an amber hue through the living room windows. Emma was sitting on the stairs, waiting. He stopped when he saw her, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched slightly. How was it? She asked. He hesitated. We talked. That's all. Emma nodded once, not trusting herself to ask more. I think I needed to see her, he continued. Not for closure or answers. Just to know that it wasn't still holding me back. And was it? She asked, her voice quieter now. Daniel took a breath. Yes. But not in the way I thought. I kept imagining this moment where she'd apologize, or explain. But she didn't have anything new to say. She's moved on. She's happy. Emma studied his face. And you? I think I'm finally starting to be. There was something raw in his voice, something real and unguarded that she hadn't seen before. She stepped down the last few stairs, closing the distance between them. Thank you, he said suddenly. For what? For coming with me. For doing all of this. Emma held his gaze. I didn't just come for you, Daniel. Somewhere along the way, it became more than that. He didn't speak, but the emotion in his eyes said enough. They moved into the dining room where the rest of the family had already gathered. The evening meal felt less performative this time, less strained. Even Walter, though still distant, seemed more relaxed, offering short comments here and there, occasionally directed at Daniel. Margaret was in good spirits, recounting a story from Daniel's childhood that made everyone laugh, even Alex cracked a reluctant smile. But there was still an unspoken awareness in the room, a sense that something had shifted, that beneath the casual conversation, there had been a tectonic movement none of them could name just yet. After dessert, as the plates were cleared and the family began to drift into the living room, Alex approached Daniel near the hallway. You met with her, he said, not asking but stating. Daniel nodded. Yeah. Alex didn't speak for a moment, then said, You okay? Daniel looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his brother's voice. I think so. Alex gave a short nod. Good. He turned to go, but paused. You know, I always assumed you ran away after she left. I never thought maybe you stayed away to survive it. Daniel blinked. I didn't know that either. Until recently. Alex didn't smile, but the tension in his jaw eased. Welcome back, then. The moment passed quickly, but it left a trace. Emma saw it, and so did Margaret, who watched from the other side of the room with quiet satisfaction. Later, when the house had gone still again, Emma and Daniel returned to the guest suite. She sat at the edge of the bed, unlacing her shoes, while he stood by the window, hands in his pockets. She said something today, he said suddenly. Rachel? He nodded. She said she never really saw me. Not fully. That I was always holding part of myself back. Emma looked up. Were you? Daniel considered the question. Maybe. I thought being perfect would keep things together. I thought if I played the part well enough, no one would notice how lost I was. And now? He turned toward her. Now I'm tired of pretending. She stood and crossed the room slowly. Then stop. Daniel met her halfway, and for the first time, the space between them felt entirely theirs, not borrowed, not manufactured, not scripted. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a declaration. It was just two people finally stepping out from behind the stories they'd told and seeing each other clearly. And for the first time since she arrived in Asheville, Emma no longer felt like she was playing a role. She felt like herself. And she wasn't sure when it had happened, but she was starting to think that might be exactly what Daniel needed all along. The rain didn't return the next morning. Instead, soft sunlight poured in through the slats of the shutters, warming the floorboards of the guest suite. Emma stirred awake slowly, aware of the silence, not the heavy, tense silence of awkwardness, but something lighter. A quiet that felt earned. Daniel was still asleep on the couch, one arm draped over his eyes, his chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. Emma sat up, watching him for a moment. For the first time since their arrival, he looked truly at ease, even vulnerable. Not the man trying to maintain a story, or impress a family, or bury a ghost, but simply himself. She dressed and slipped quietly out of the room, padding down the hallway barefoot until she reached the kitchen. Margaret was already there, dressed in a navy robe, her hair clipped back. The air smelled of fresh coffee and toasted bread. Morning, Margaret said with a smile. Sleep well? Emma nodded. Better than expected. Good, she replied, passing her a mug. There's no schedule today. People will come and go as they please. It might be the calmest day we've had. Emma took a sip of the coffee, the warmth grounding her. Margaret gave her a long look, then said, You seem lighter today. Emma hesitated, then offered, So does Daniel. I noticed, Margaret said quietly. Whatever happened yesterday, it helped. Emma gave a small smile. I think it helped him see things more clearly. Margaret didn't press. She returned to the sink, humming faintly. The moment passed like so many others in the Parker home, full of meaning, but unspoken. Later that morning, Daniel emerged freshly showered and freshly shaved, his hair still damp and unruly. They exchanged a glance in the hallway, and she smiled without thinking. I was wondering if you'd run off in the night, he joked. I considered it, she replied. But I couldn't figure out where you hid my shoes. They decided to get out of the house for a while, and with Margaret's encouragement, took the car into town. Asheville's downtown district was a blend of the old and the hip, brick buildings with modern cafes, art galleries tucked between hardware stores, the scent of roasted coffee beans carried through the air by a soft breeze. They wandered without agenda, slipping into shops, sharing a pastry from a street vendor, pointing out odd window displays. With no one watching, no family observing, they relaxed into something more natural. Their conversations flowed with a rhythm untouched by obligation. So, Daniel asked as they exited a vintage bookstore, You ever think about leaving Denver? Emma shrugged. Sometimes. I don't know where I'd go. I like my students, I like my neighborhood. But it's not home, not really. What is home then? She thought for a moment. I don't know. I think it's more about who than where. He looked at her. Yeah. I think so too. They stopped at a quiet cafe for lunch, sitting at a small table near a window that overlooked a park. Children played on swings while couples strolled hand in hand. Emma stirred her tea absent-mindedly as she watched a little girl chase a squirrel across the grass. Did you always want to be a teacher? Daniel asked. I think I did. I just didn't know it until it happened. I went to college thinking I'd study literature. Maybe become a writer. But then I volunteered at an after-school program one semester, and suddenly everything else faded. He smiled. You're good with people. Kids especially. It makes sense. What about you? She asked. Science teacher in a public school, that doesn't sound like the dream job of every boy growing up. Daniel chuckled. It wasn't. I actually wanted to be an architect. Spent years studying for it. Internships, sleepless nights, all of it. Then one day I woke up and realized I didn't want to spend my life designing buildings for other people. I wanted to help kids who didn't think they belonged in the sciences. The weird ones, the quiet ones. The ones like me. Emma leaned forward slightly. You were quiet? Painfully. All through school. I didn't find my voice until college. She tilted her head. I find that hard to believe. He smiled, a little embarrassed. It's true. I only started coming out of my shell when I realized nobody else really knew what they were doing either. Emma laughed softly. Is that what this whole adult thing is? Just pretending we know? Pretty much. They sat for a while, their plates nearly empty, their conversation quieting into something even more intimate, comfortable silence. No lies. No rehearsed stories. Just the space between two people learning each other without expectation. On the way back to the house, they passed the same park they had seen from the window. Daniel pulled the car over and parked. Want to walk a bit? He asked. Emma nodded. The park was quiet, the children gone now, replaced by joggers and the occasional dog walker. The air smelled of grass and fading blossoms. They walked without hurry, arms occasionally brushing. I've been thinking about what comes next, Daniel said, his voice lower now. Emma glanced at him. After this weekend? He nodded. And? He took a breath. I don't want to go back to how things were. Before all this. Emma stopped walking. You mean pretending? He looked at her. I mean you and me. I don't know what we are now, but I don't want this to end just because the weekend does. She didn't answer immediately. Her heart beat faster, not with anxiety this time, but with clarity. I don't either, she said. But I also don't want to keep pretending. About any of it. Daniel smiled, slow and quiet. Then let's stop pretending. They walked on, the silence between them now filled with something unspoken but understood. Back at the Parker home, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Walter was in the den reading, not alone, but with Alex beside him on the opposite couch, the two of them engaged in quiet conversation. Sarah was feeding the baby in the kitchen, and Margaret was on the porch, trimming a few plants. Emma and Daniel joined her outside, sitting on the steps while she worked. You two look different, Margaret said without looking up. Emma raised an eyebrow. Good different? Margaret smiled to herself. You'll figure it out. Daniel nudged her gently. Told you she always knows. They sat there until the sun dipped low, the sky blushing with gold and rose. It was peaceful, ordinary, yet nothing about it felt small. In fact, it felt like something beginning. Not a performance. Not a borrowed moment. Something real. The serenity that had begun to settle over the Parker home did not last. By Sunday morning, a different kind of tension began creeping into the atmosphere, not loud or immediate, but subtle, like the shift in wind before a storm. It began with glances. A second too long from Alex. A pause in Sarah's cheerful tone. A slight stiffness in Margaret's voice when Emma passed her in the hallway. Emma felt it before she understood it. The unease of walking into a room and knowing something had changed. It wasn't until just after breakfast, as Daniel left to take a phone call outside, that the shape of it finally revealed itself. She was in the kitchen, helping Sarah clear the plates, when Alex appeared in the doorway with his arms crossed, the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Emma," he said, tone flat, "can we talk?" Sarah shot Emma a look, a mix of concern and curiosity, but said nothing. Emma wiped her hands on a dish towel and followed him into the den, where he closed the door behind them. "What's this about?" she asked carefully. Alex didn't waste time. He held up his phone. "Is this you?" he asked, turning the screen toward her. On it was her public faculty page, Emma Collins, 3rd grade teacher at Willow Creek Elementary School. A smiling headshot. Biography. No mention of a fiancé. "Yes," she said evenly. "That's me." Alex's expression didn't change. "You've been at the same school for 5 years. You've lived in Denver the entire time. You're not engaged. You're not even dating anyone." Emma's heart thudded in her chest, but she didn't look away. "Daniel asked me to help him," she said. "And I did." "Why?" "Because he needed someone. Because he asked. Because," she stopped herself. Alex's voice was low. "Do you have any idea what this means for my parents? For the rest of the family?" Emma straightened. "I know it's complicated. And I'm not proud of lying to anyone. But none of this was meant to hurt you." Alex paced once, then turned back to her. "He used to tell me everything. Even when we didn't get along, even when we argued. But after Rachel, he shut us all out. For years. And then out of nowhere, he shows up with you. With a ring. With this story." Emma swallowed hard. "He wasn't trying to fool you. He was trying to find a way back in. Through a lie? Through survival," she said. "He couldn't face you all on your terms. He came back the only way he knew how." Alex's jaw tightened. "And you helped him pretend. Let my mom believe. Let us believe." Emma met his eyes. "I didn't plan this, Alex. I said yes because I care about him. I said yes because I saw someone trying, even if he was doing it the wrong way." He said nothing for a long moment. Then finally, quietly, he asked, "Does he know you care?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Alex stepped closer. "Then maybe you should tell him before someone else does." And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the den with the weight of everything now fully exposed. She found Daniel sitting alone on the porch swing, the phone call over, his expression unreadable. When she stepped outside, he looked up at her and knew. The moment their eyes met, he knew. "Alex confronted you," he said, voice low. Emma nodded. "He found my faculty page. Put the pieces together." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Of course he did. He's angry," she said, moving to sit beside him, "but not just at you. At what you lost. At the way you shut him out." Daniel leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the porch. "I thought this weekend would be simple. A clean way to reconnect. I thought if I could just get through it, I'd find my way back to them." "You are," Emma said. "But not through the lie." He turned to her. "So what now? Do I tell them? Admit everything?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand. "I think you have to decide what's more important, keeping their image of you intact, or letting them actually see you." Daniel looked down at their joined hands. "I told myself this was just for the weekend," he murmured. "Just a performance." Emma's voice was quiet. "Me too." "But it's not, is it?" he said. She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "It's not." Later that day, as the family gathered again for an early dinner, the shift was noticeable. Alex was quieter than usual, and Sarah kept glancing between Daniel and Emma as if waiting for something. Margaret, unaware of the truth but sensing the change, tried to keep the conversation light. At one point during the meal, Walter looked up from his plate and fixed his gaze on Daniel. "I have to admit," he said, voice calm but deliberate, "this weekend has been full of surprises." Daniel met his eyes. "It wasn't meant to be." Walter took a sip of his drink. "And yet, here we are." The silence that followed stretched. Margaret intervened. "I think what matters is that Daniel came home. And he brought someone who makes him smile again. That's more than enough for me." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. But it was nothing compared to the look on Daniel's face: gratitude, shame, longing, all tangled into one. After dinner, he pulled her aside, just inside the kitchen. "I need to tell them," he said. "Tonight." Emma nodded. "You don't have to do it alone." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I don't want to do anything alone anymore." They waited until the others had settled in the living room, scattered around the sofas and armchairs, chatting over coffee and dessert. Daniel stood in the doorway, Emma beside him, both of them holding on to the moment like a fragile thread. He cleared his throat. "There's something I need to say." Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Margaret set down her teacup. Walter looked up, brows furrowed. Alex leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "I haven't been honest," Daniel said. "Not with any of you. Emma's not my fiancée. We're not getting married. Not yet. Maybe not ever." A stunned silence fell. "I asked her to come with me because I didn't think I could come back here alone. After everything with Rachel, after how I left, I couldn't face you like that. So I created something easier. Something that looked right." Margaret stared at him, her lips slightly parted. "But it wasn't right," Daniel continued. "It was just a performance. Until it wasn't. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about pretending. Because Emma, she reminded me how to be myself. Not the version you all wanted. Just me." His voice faltered, and Emma stepped forward. "I agreed to help him because he was someone who deserved a second chance," she said. "And I never meant to deceive anyone. But I think, somewhere in all of this, I found something real, too." No one moved. For a moment, the air felt frozen. Then, slowly, Margaret stood. She walked to Daniel, stopping in front of him, her face unreadable. Then she reached out and pulled him into a hug. "You didn't have to be perfect," she whispered. "You just had to come home." Walter didn't speak, but he gave a single nod. Sarah looked emotional, her hand resting on her chest. And Alex, after a long moment, simply said, "Took you long enough." The tension broke. Not completely. Not cleanly. But enough. Later that night, as they sat side by side on the guest suite bed, Daniel took Emma's hand. "So," he said quietly, "what now?" Emma rested her head on his shoulder. "Now we stop lying. To them. To ourselves." He kissed the top of her head and exhaled, the weight of the weekend finally lifting. And though nothing had gone as planned, something true had emerged from the fiction. Something worth holding on to. Morning came slowly, as if the house itself needed time to absorb the truth that had finally been laid bare the night before. For the first time since Emma and Daniel had arrived, the air inside the Parker home felt still, but not tense, quiet in the way a storm leaves the world washed clean. Emma woke with a clear head, though the remnants of emotion clung to her skin like morning dew. Downstairs, the clinking of dishes and the faint rumble of voices suggested life was returning to normal, whatever that meant now. She dressed in silence and found Daniel already awake, seated by the window with a mug in his hands. He didn't speak right away, and neither did she. Finally, he said, "They didn't throw us out." Emma smiled. "That's the standard now?" He shrugged. "Considering what we dropped on them, I was prepared for worse." But they both knew the truth. What had happened the night before hadn't destroyed anything, it had illuminated it. For the first time, their relationship was no longer hidden behind performance. And for the first time, Daniel had let his family see him as he truly was. They joined the others in the dining room for breakfast. Margaret was by the stove, flipping pancakes with mechanical ease, while Sarah sat at the table with the baby bouncing on her knee. Alex, surprisingly, was already there, leaning back in his chair with a newspaper folded in his lap. Walter, of course, was absent. Emma had come to understand that his presence was always selectively offered. When they entered, conversation paused only momentarily before resuming, as if they were already being folded back into the rhythm of the household. "Morning," Margaret said with a smile that was gentler than usual. "Morning," Daniel replied. Emma moved to pour herself a cup of coffee, her heart lighter than it had been all weekend. Alex looked up from his paper. "So? No wedding?" Daniel braced himself. "No. Shame. I had a toast ready." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? Was it heartfelt and suspicious?" Alex grinned. "Mostly suspicious." They all laughed, and just like that, the temperature shifted. Not into celebration, not yet, but into something warmer than tolerance. Into acceptance. Margaret served everyone, placing pancakes on each plate with practiced care. When she reached Emma, she paused. "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "I'm still grateful you came." Emma looked up, caught off guard. "Even after everything?" Margaret nodded. "Especially after everything. It's easy to love someone who fits into a story. It's harder when the story falls apart." Emma didn't know how to respond. She just gave a small nod of thanks, her throat tight. They ate, and talked, and laughed about little things. No one mentioned Rachel. No one questioned the future. The topic of the fake engagement didn't return, not out of avoidance, but because they had already passed through it. The moment had come and gone, and the truth had made space for something new to grow. That afternoon, while Daniel helped his father replace a piece of siding on the garage, a gesture that felt more significant than anyone admitted, Emma sat with Margaret on the porch, the two of them sipping iced tea and watching the light stretch across the lawn. "He used to sit out here with her," Margaret said suddenly, not looking at Emma. "Rachel?" Emma asked. Margaret nodded. "They'd drink coffee and talk about their future. I remember thinking it was all so perfect. Too perfect, maybe." Emma glanced sideways. "Do you miss her?" "Sometimes," Margaret said. "But not in the way you think. I miss who she was before things got too big. I miss what Daniel was like when he still believed everything would fall into place." Emma traced the rim of her glass with one finger. "He doesn't believe that anymore," she said. "No," Margaret agreed. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe now, he's learning to build something instead of waiting for it to happen." Emma stayed quiet, letting the words settle. Margaret turned to her. "Do you love him?" It was not a dramatic question, not an accusation. Just a sincere inquiry from a mother who had learned, finally, to ask instead of assume. Emma didn't hesitate. "Yes." Margaret nodded once. "Then don't let fear be the reason you walk away." Emma turned her eyes to the horizon. "I won't," she said. Later, as the day began to fade into evening, Daniel returned from the garage with dirt on his hands and sweat at his temples. He found Emma by the garden, trimming back some of the browning petals from Margaret's flower beds. "You're still working?" he asked. She stood and dusted off her palms. "Just helping. I owed your mom a few favors." He looked at her. "You didn't owe her anything." Emma met his gaze. "I kind of did. But not anymore." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm thinking of telling my students about this weekend." She raised an eyebrow. "All of it?" He chuckled. "Maybe not the fake engagement part. But the real part. The hard part. About honesty. And how sometimes it's the hardest lesson we learn." I think they'd respect that. I think I'm finally ready to live it." She didn't say anything. She just reached for his hand. That night, the last dinner before their return to Denver, was more intimate than the others. No extended family. No elaborate table settings. Just the immediate circle: Margaret, Walter, Alex, Sarah, the baby, Emma, and Daniel. They sat closer, laughed louder, passed plates and stories with ease. Walter surprised everyone when, at the end of the meal, he raised his glass and cleared his throat. "I don't give many speeches," he began, his voice gravelly but deliberate. Daniel looked up, caught off guard. "But I'll say this: families are messy. Expectations don't always lead where we hope. And sometimes, the best thing we can do is let people come back without asking why they left." Everyone was still. "I'm glad you're home, son." Daniel blinked once, twice, then nodded. "Thanks, Dad." The toast wasn't elaborate. But it landed with the force of years unspoken. Afterward, Daniel and Emma stood in the quiet of the hallway, coats in hand, saying goodnight to everyone before heading to bed. Margaret kissed both their cheeks. Sarah gave Emma a hug that lingered longer than expected. Alex simply said, "Next time, just bring her as herself." Daniel smiled. "Deal." As they reached the stairs, Walter stepped forward. "Emma." She turned. "I meant what I said," he told her. "About letting people come back." "I know," she said softly. "I think Daniel's better with you in his life." "So do I." He nodded once, then stepped aside. In the guest suite, as they packed their bags in slow silence, Daniel reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out the ring, the simple silver band with the modest stone. "I should return this," he said. Emma took it from him, held it in her palm for a moment. "Maybe not yet," she said. "Maybe it deserves a different story." Daniel smiled. "A true one," he said. And for the first time, the weight of the weekend felt like it had found its place, not as a burden, but as the beginning of something they hadn't known they were searching for. The sun rose slowly on the day of their departure, casting long shadows across the Parker lawn and staining the porch railings with a soft golden hue. The last morning had arrived, and with it came a strange stillness neither Emma nor Daniel could quite define. It wasn't dread, and it wasn't relief, it was something between the two. A quiet awareness that they were about to step out of the safe, self-contained world they had inhabited for the past 3 days and return to one with its own demands, distance, and uncertainties. Emma moved around the guest suite in deliberate silence, folding her clothes and slipping them into her suitcase while Daniel stood by the window, sipping his coffee, staring out toward the garden where they'd spent hours pretending and, later, learning not to. "They're going to miss you," he said without turning around. Emma smiled faintly. "I'm going to miss them, too." Daniel set his mug down and turned toward her. "It feels weird to leave now. Like something was just starting to make sense." She zipped her suitcase and sat down on the edge of the bed. "That's the thing about pretending, you never expect it to lead to something real." He sat beside her, hands resting loosely between his knees. "Do you think this can work? Once we're back in Denver?" Emma looked at him, unsure how to answer immediately. Their time in Asheville had been like a pause button on reality. They had entered with a lie and emerged with something more honest than either had anticipated. But outside this house, outside this family and these routines, things wouldn't be as simple. "I think it depends on whether we're willing to stop performing, even when it's hard." Daniel nodded slowly, then stood. "We should say our goodbyes." The farewell in the kitchen was quiet, unceremonious. Margaret hugged them both, slipping a small Tupperware container into Emma's bag. "Just a few of the blueberry muffins you liked," she said, and asked them to call when they got home. Sarah and Alex appeared briefly to wish them safe travels, the latter giving Emma a pointed look that somehow managed to be both skeptical and respectful. Walter didn't come down, but neither of them expected him to. His toast the night before had spoken more than most of his words that weekend. The drive to the airport was long, the two of them saying little. The silence wasn't heavy, but introspective. As the roads narrowed and the mountains rolled past, Emma found herself wishing she could hold on to the simplicity of the last day just a little longer. It wasn't until they reached their gate that the distance between what had happened in Asheville and the life waiting for them back in Denver became undeniable. Daniel turned to her as they sat in the terminal. "You're different now," he said. Emma tilted her head. "In what way?" "I think you showed up to help me fake something, and ended up telling more truth than I ever have." She smiled. "And you stopped running." "I did," he admitted. "But I'm still not sure I've figured out what to run toward." She took his hand. "Maybe we don't need to run anymore. Maybe we just walk." They boarded the plane and returned to Denver as quietly as they had left. The city greeted them with its usual rhythm: traffic, noise, people walking too fast. Their respective apartments, just 15 minutes apart, suddenly felt much farther. Over the next few days, the high of the weekend began to wane. Routine returned. Papers to grade, emails to answer, lessons to plan. The questions that had waited patiently in the background now pressed forward. Emma sat in her apartment on a Thursday night, half watching a documentary, half rewriting a math worksheet, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Can I see you tonight?" She didn't hesitate. 20 minutes later, she opened her door to find him standing there, hair wind-tossed, looking like he hadn't slept well. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "For what?" "For retreating again." She stepped aside, letting him in. He paced a little, clearly agitated. "I've been trying to go back to normal this week. Teaching, planning, answering texts like none of it changed me. But it did. And I can't ignore it." Emma watched him, heart thudding. "I thought maybe we'd just go back to being colleagues. Friends, maybe. But every time I try to make sense of that, I can't. Because it doesn't fit anymore." She crossed her arms. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want this to be real. Not a role, not a cover, not a weekend experiment. I want to see where it goes, even if it's messy." Emma's breath caught. "It will be messy. I know. And uncertain. I know. And people will talk. They'll wonder why we pretended. Why we lied." He stepped closer. "Then let them talk." She looked up at him, eyes searching. "Are you sure?" He took her hands. "I was sure when you walked into my parents' house. I was just too scared to admit it." She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. His arms wrapped around her without hesitation. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay?" Emma looked up. "Let's try." And just like that, a decision was made. Not with fanfare, not with perfect certainty. But with honesty. The next morning, Daniel brought coffee to her classroom before the bell rang, earning a few curious looks from passing teachers. He leaned against her doorframe, holding two cups like they were partners in something the world hadn't quite caught up to yet. "Weekend plans?" he asked casually. Emma smiled. "Maybe we take a walk. No lies this time. No pretending." "I'd like that." She watched him leave, the warmth of his presence lingering long after. What had started as a lie had peeled back more truth than either of them could have imagined. But the final challenge wasn't in getting through the weekend. It was in choosing to stay real once the pretending stopped. And now, they were beginning, messy, unpolished, unperformed. Together. The days in Denver unfolded with a rhythm that was both familiar and strangely new. Emma and Daniel moved carefully, navigating the space between friendship and something deeper. The weekend in Asheville had left a permanent imprint on both of them, but the real world demanded more than stolen moments and hushed conversations. It was a bright Saturday morning when Emma decided to take a walk through her neighborhood park. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. She needed the solitude, time to think, to breathe, to untangle the complicated web of her thoughts. As she rounded a bend near the playground, she nearly collided with someone stepping out from behind a tree. Startled, she looked up and recognized the face immediately, Rachel. Rachel, the name that had haunted the past weekend, stood there with an awkward smile, her eyes betraying a mixture of surprise and something unreadable. She looked different, more grounded, softer than Emma had imagined. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rachel cleared her throat. "Emma, right? Daniel's friend?" she asked tentatively. Emma nodded cautiously. "Yes. And you're Rachel?" "That's me," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the tension. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Emma admitted. "I thought you were visiting your aunt in Asheville." "I was," Rachel replied. "But I had to come home early." They stood in the quiet park, children playing at a distance, their laughter a sharp contrast to the stillness between the two women. "I wanted to talk to you," Rachel said finally. "About Daniel?" "About what happened?" Emma folded her arms. "I'm listening." Rachel took a deep breath. "I ended things because I was scared. Scared of the expectations, the family, the future that was forced on us. I thought if I walked away, I could find myself." Emma looked down. "Did you?" Rachel shrugged. "Somewhat. But it didn't stop the guilt. Or the pain. I didn't realize how much I was hurting Daniel until much later." Emma's throat tightened. "He hasn't said much about you." Rachel's eyes softened. "I'm not proud of the way I left. I never wanted to hurt him or his family. I just couldn't stay." Emma took a step closer. "Why tell me this now?" Rachel hesitated. "Because I want to be honest. With you. With Daniel. And because I think you're the person he needs right now." Emma felt a wave of emotion, sympathy, jealousy, understanding, all tangled together. "Thank you," she said quietly. Rachel smiled, a genuine warmth that surprised Emma. "There's more," Rachel added. "I'm planning to stay in town for a while. To make amends where I can." Emma nodded. "That's brave." Rachel's smile faltered. "I hope it's enough." They stood in silence a moment longer before Rachel stepped back. "I should go," she said. "But if you want to talk, I'm here." Emma watched her walk away, the unexpected twist of Rachel's return stirring a new kind of uncertainty. Later that day, Emma called Daniel, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Rachel's here," she said simply. There was a long pause on the other end. "Did you talk?" Daniel finally asked. "I did," Emma replied. "She wants to make amends." Daniel exhaled. "I never expected that." "Neither did I." They agreed to meet later, to face the complexities together. That evening, Emma arrived at a quiet cafe where Daniel was already waiting. His eyes held a mix of relief and apprehension. "She's back," he said softly. Emma nodded. "We need to talk. All of us." Daniel took her hand. "I'm ready." When Rachel joined them, the air was thick with unspoken questions and tentative hope. The conversation was honest, raw, and sometimes painful. Rachel apologized for the past, Daniel shared his lingering fears, and Emma listened, feeling the fragile threads of trust begin to weave between them. It wasn't a clean break or a simple resolution. But it was a beginning, a chance to confront the past and build something stronger. As they left the cafe, Emma looked at Daniel, her heart steady. "We're not out of the woods," she said. "No," Daniel agreed. "But we're moving forward. Together." And for the first time, the future didn't seem so uncertain. The days after the cafe meeting felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Emma and Daniel faced the delicate task of rebuilding not just their relationship but also the intricate web of connections that had frayed over the years. Rachel's unexpected return was a catalyst, not just for confrontation but for healing, albeit uneven and tentative. At first, Daniel kept his distance, retreating into himself as memories and emotions surfaced. Emma understood the need for space but also felt the urgency to stay present. They navigated conversations with care, often lingering in silence, allowing feelings to settle rather than rush toward closure. One evening, as the city lights flickered beyond the classroom window, Emma sat with Daniel at a small cafe after school. The chatter of other patrons filled the room, but their focus was solely on each other. "Have you told your parents how you feel?" Emma asked softly. Daniel looked into his coffee cup, swirling the liquid absent-mindedly. "Not fully. I'm afraid. Not just of their reaction but of confronting my own feelings." Emma reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "They're your family, Daniel. They want to support you, even if it's messy." He sighed. "Maybe. I just don't want to disappoint them again." "You can't live for their approval," Emma said gently. "You have to live for yourself." The honesty of the words hung in the air between them, bridging the gap of uncertainty. In the days that followed, Daniel began opening up more, not just to Emma but to his family. He initiated calls with Margaret and Alex, mending fences that had long been neglected. Margaret welcomed his efforts with warmth, encouraging him to be honest about his feelings. Alex, though cautious, showed signs of softening, occasionally texting to check in or sharing a memory from their childhood. Emma, too, found herself drawn into the family fold in unexpected ways. She was invited to help plan a small celebration for Margaret's upcoming birthday and joined in weekend brunches where laughter flowed more freely than it had before. Each gathering was a reminder that rebuilding took time but was possible when rooted in truth and patience. Work continued to provide a grounding force for Emma. She found solace in her classroom, where the innocence and curiosity of her students contrasted with the complexities of adult life. Daniel visited often, helping with projects or simply sitting quietly at the back, absorbing the energy of the room. One afternoon, as the autumn leaves tumbled outside the school, Daniel asked Emma to meet him at a nearby park after classes. She arrived to find him setting up a small picnic near the pond, a blanket spread with homemade sandwiches and thermoses of tea. They sat together, the conversation flowing easily as they watched families play and joggers pass by. "I've been thinking," Daniel began, "about what comes next for us." Emma smiled. "The last time you said that, we were in a cafe with Rachel." He chuckled. "True. But this time, I mean it differently. I want to build something real. No pretenses. No hiding." Emma reached for his hand. "Me too." Their plans were simple, taking it day by day, nurturing the fragile trust between them. They talked about possible moves, careers, and even the idea of eventually living together. It was overwhelming but hopeful. One evening, back at the Parker house for a casual dinner, Walter surprised everyone by joining the family at the table. His presence was quiet but significant, a sign that the distance was closing. After dinner, as the others cleared the dishes, Walter pulled Daniel aside. "I'm proud of you," he said gruffly. "For facing your past and trying to make things right." Daniel's eyes glistened. "Thank you, Dad." Margaret joined them, her smile radiant. "We're all learning, Daniel. Together." Emma watched them, feeling the warmth of a family slowly healing. It was messy, imperfect, but real. As the weeks turned into months, Emma and Daniel's bond deepened. They faced challenges, disagreements, and moments of doubt, but always returned to the foundation they had built: honesty, vulnerability, and shared hope. One chilly evening, as they walked through the neighborhood, Daniel stopped and turned to Emma. "I want to make a promise," he said, voice steady. "To be honest with you. To face whatever comes together." Emma smiled, her heart full. "I want that too." They embraced beneath the glow of streetlights, the world around them quiet and vast. Rebuilding had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. New beginnings weren't about erasing the past but learning to live with it and grow. And together, Emma and Daniel were ready to write their next chapter, imperfect, hopeful, and entirely their own. The evening of the final dinner before Emma's return to Denver arrived with an unspoken sense of significance that no one explicitly acknowledged but that everyone felt in the quiet exchanges and subtle glances around the Parker household. The gathering was intimate: Margaret, Walter, Alex with his wife Sarah and their baby, Daniel, and Emma. The grand, formal dinners of the weekend had been replaced by a warmth that felt genuine, a stark contrast to the tension and guardedness of days before. The dining room, softly lit by the chandelier's glow, was filled with the hum of casual conversation punctuated by laughter, the clinking of cutlery against fine china, and the faint aroma of Margaret's home-cooked meal. The table was simpler this time, comfort food, lovingly prepared, a celebration of presence rather than perfection. As the meal drew to a close, the room settled into a calm quietude, the kind that precedes a moment of shared understanding. Margaret stood, glass raised in a toast, her eyes scanning the faces around the table. Her voice was steady, tinged with emotion. "I don't make many speeches," she began, "but I feel like tonight calls for one. Family is never simple. Expectations, disappointments, pain, they all come wrapped together. But what matters most is the courage to be honest, to forgive, and to welcome each other home, no matter how long it takes." She glanced at Daniel, who met her gaze with a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. "This weekend," Margaret continued, "has been more than a visit. It's been a journey. One of healing, of new beginnings. Daniel, you've come back to us, and you've brought someone very special with you. Someone who, despite all the challenges, has stood by you and reminded you, and us, what it means to love without pretense." Her eyes softened as they rested on Emma. "Emma, thank you for being here. For your honesty, your kindness, and the light you've brought back into our family." A hush fell over the room. Daniel reached for Emma's hand beneath the table, squeezing it gently. Walter, who had been silent until now, lifted his glass with a slow nod. "To family," he said gruffly. "In all its forms." Everyone raised their glasses, the sound ringing clear in the quiet room. The toast was simple but heartfelt, a sealing of unspoken bonds and a promise of togetherness despite past wounds. Daniel cleared his throat, standing slowly and drawing the room's attention. "I'd like to say a few words," he began, voice steady though laced with emotion. "When I asked Emma to pretend to be my fiancée, I never imagined how much it would change me. I thought it was just a way to keep up appearances, to make things easier. But it turned into something real, something I never expected." He glanced at Emma, a soft smile breaking through his usual reserve. "Emma came into my life as a favor, but she stayed as a truth. She helped me face my past, my family, and most importantly, myself. I'm grateful to have her here, not as a pretense, but as someone I care deeply about." The room was silent, each person absorbing the weight of his words. Emma stood then, her heart pounding but voice clear. "I didn't come here planning to be anyone but myself. This weekend was full of surprises, some difficult, some beautiful. But I've learned that honesty is the foundation of any relationship, whether forged by blood or choice. I'm thankful for the trust this family has shown me and for the chance to be part of something real." Tears glistened in Margaret's eyes, and Sarah brushed one from her cheek. Alex nodded appreciatively, a rare softness in his expression. Walter's eyes, stern as ever, held a quiet acceptance. The moment lingered, filled with emotion and hope. After the toast, the family moved into the living room, settling into easy conversation. Emma found herself beside Daniel, their fingers entwined naturally, the facade of pretense finally dissolved. Later, as the evening wound down, Margaret pulled Emma aside. "You've been a gift to this family," she whispered. "Thank you for being brave." Emma smiled, touched. "It's not just bravery," she said. "It's love." Margaret nodded, tears quietly streaming. The night ended with lingering hugs and promises to keep in touch. As Emma packed her bags the next morning, Daniel stood in the doorway, a mixture of joy and sadness in his eyes. "This isn't goodbye," he said softly. "It's just the beginning." Emma nodded, holding his gaze. "Together," she said. "Together." As she left the house and stepped into the sunlight, the weight of the past week settled into a gentle promise. The lie that started it all had blossomed into something unexpected and beautiful. A beginning without pretense. A family rebuilt. And a love that was finally real.